an institution, as much a part of the fabric that binds the area as the Chippewa River. And after more than a century, Sacred Heart Hospital and St. Joseph's Hospital will be closing. The shock of these closures can be felt in every inch of this area, because to us, it's more than just a hospital, just a building, just a healthcare system. It was ours, and this is its history.
So in the 1840s, the hospital sisters get formed in Germany. So this is growing in Germany all through the 1840s and 1850s, but in 1871, Otto von Bismarck unifies Germany, and it's a very fluid situation in Germany. And there's a lot of disruptions of all kinds of things, including the Catholic Church in Germany. So their monasteries closing, their nunneries closing, their societies getting organized and disorganized. And a lot of the Catholic leadership, a lot of the folks in Germany are thinking about other countries. And so some of them are thinking about the United States. And they come over to the United States in fairly big numbers at that time, the leadership does. And a lot of them end up in Illinois. And one of the charges that they take upon themselves is to minister to, and I mean that in a healthcare sense and also in a ministry sense, to the Lake Superior Ojibwas. So that brings them up into the area in the 1870s. And meanwhile, Father Charles Goldsmith has gotten his education. He's gotten assigned by the Diocese of La Crosse to come up to Chippewa Falls and be the priest up here. And he hits the ground running. And so they're organizing a German church up on the West Hill. And they're thinking, okay, now how can we care for sick people? They open up a house, they invite some of the sisters, one of them directly from Germany, still people are coming in from Germany, Sister Rosa. They invite them to come up and start caring for people out of a house, which is on the corner of Spring and Rural, right near Notre Dame Church. That quickly gets overwhelmed. They can take care of maybe 6 patients at a time in that house. And so they start planning a hospital up near what's going to be the new German Catholic Church on the West Hill, which is on Pearl Street. So that happens in 1885, where they open up in this house. So that's one of those start dates for St. Joseph.
The hospital sisters' mission was really to care for the sick and ill. And in 1889, Eau Claire didn't have a hospital at Chippewa Falls, which was that much further north. They had had a hospital since 1885, but with the accidents in the North Woods and the issues that were in both cities, Eau Claire itself felt like it needed its own hospital. The priest at Sacred Heart Church, Father Bain, did write to the sisters in Springfield, Illinois, asking them to come north to build a hospital.
In 1889, when the sisters first came to Eau Claire, they just set up a temporary location in the home of James and Ann Fitzpatrick. We think it was somewhere probably near the intersection of what is now North Dewey and St. Louis Streets, right across the street from where the Eau Claire Academy is now, or what used to be the Eau Claire Academy and what was the original Sacred Heart Hospital building. The hospital opened in the late summer of 1890 and was not quite successful right away from what I've heard. I mean, there were a lot of people that would come in and they did fill the hospital beds quickly. But from what one of the doctors said, one of the original surgeons, he said that he had a hard time convincing people that the hospital was a place to go to get better. People kind of considered it as a place to go as a last resort, and that was the place you went to die. So it did take a little while for people to kind of warm up to the idea of the hospital. It was fully operating by the fall of 1890.
Well, my earliest memory, I was born and my whole family was were the old Sacred Heart Hospital. My family has about 100 years invested into Sacred Heart Hospital. I was 18 years old when I first started. I had gone right out of high school into the tech school to become a licensed practical nurse. At that time, I was hired onto 6th floor, which was the surgical floor, a urology floor. Went back to school to St. Joseph School of Nursing, which was a 3rd-year program. I stayed working casual and on weekends at Sacred Heart at that time. After I got my diploma in nursing, I went on to become a bachelor's in nursing and worked in critical care in 1981. And from there, I transferred when I having my family to ER, and the majority, like I said, of my career was spent in the emergency department. I was very much a patient advocate, which meant that whatever came first for my patient was what was important. And how I treated my patients is how I wanted my family member treated. And in that, over the years, I was a mentor for a great many nurses. I always felt that if you mentored them well, they would stay with the hospital, and they would also give the same type of nursing care to patients.
The nuns felt that they could handle staffing up until about 1917. There's talk in some of the hospital histories of beginning in 1917, they realized that they needed more help. And so they opened a nursing school that year and started training their own nurses. The first major expansion that happened was in 1910. And they expanded from 17 beds, which was the original capacity of the hospital. They expanded to 48 beds. And then they also, at the same time, they built an entrance for horse-drawn ambulance so that they had that capability as well. There were some smaller additions throughout the 19-teens and the early 1920s, but then in 1926, a woman named Mary Delaney made a donation to the hospital in honor of her husband. She was the wife of a very wealthy lumberman, and that allowed in 1926 for the hospital to expand to 120 beds. And then later on in the early 1930s, Mrs. Delaney made her second gift, and that allowed for a remodel and a completion of the maternity and pediatric wards.
Sacred Heart has been a place of care and refuge for those who don't always have a place to go. When I walk in, I'm always struck by, you really get a sense of the love your neighbor, of the Christian mission of care for the least of these. And, for me, it seems like that is representative of the best of the Christian tradition.
We would expect morals and values to be front and center. I think one of the sayings is to treat everybody as if they were Christ. So if you really believe in Jesus and you're treating everybody as if they're Jesus, that's a really big deal. So you would expect that when you enter the room, that you're going to be treated like that. You would expect to see a chaplain. You would expect your spiritual needs to take care of. That it's you're not just treated as a body, you're treated as a person, holistically.
To me, the housekeeping people, there were always people peppered in there who were wonderful examples to you of serving and of really carrying on the nun's mission, like that, person who went the extra mile. I think set a tone at St. Joe's and Sacred Heart.
I had an unexpected heart issue, or actually more accurately an artery issue, which I mistook for heartburn for about a week before I decided something was seriously wrong in the middle of the night. That was the beginning of my most recent and probably most memorable interactions with this wonderful hospital, Sacred Heart Hospital. The next person I thought I'd see was the ER doc that I'd seen earlier, but instead, someone else comes in whom I did not recognize. It turns out that she is a cardiac surgeon with her physician assistant at her side, and they said, we're just going to have to get you into the first opening we have for operation. I've never had anything as serious as the kind of surgery she was talking about. I didn't know what she was going to do. I just knew it was pretty serious, and being able to receive the anointing of the sick, receive communion right there in the hospital, meant the world to me.
When Sacred Heart Hospital moved from the north side, Dewey, to the south side on Claremont, they went from like a 4-acre plot of land to about 28 acres. And so their capacity to grow and to expand and to serve the population that was growing south of the city really expanded as well. And so that for the city, they went from just a few hundred beds on what was really a landlocked site on the north side, the old north side where that old hospital didn't really seem very modern, to a very modern facility in 1964, where it grew to be 9 stories. And so for the city, it felt like they were in the modern era.
Having the new hospital on Claremont that opened in 1964 was a big deal for the community. It significantly enlarged the hospital capacity of the city, and you could tell how much the entire city as a whole saw it as a need in the community because so many people showed up to take a tour of it. The first weekend that it was open, the staff expected to give tours to 12,000 people, and they ended up with 22,000 people coming through, which was, I think, almost half the population of Eau Claire at that time. There was actually farmland right next to Claremont Avenue at that time. The Stein farm was still there. When you look at some of the aerial pictures, you see it almost looks like Sacred Heart Hospital is just standing there all by itself. You know, you can see the university a little bit in the background, but it looked like it was out kind of on the outskirts of town at that time.
It was like this huge visual reminder of the growth and possibility that Eau Claire had.
In the late 60s, they start planning, okay, we're going to run our room, we're as big as we can be on this lot, and Chippewa has grown up around us, so we can't expand. You know, at the time that hospital was built, it was on the far edges, but now it's right in the middle of the West Hills, so we can't expand any further. We should start planning a new hospital. So, as they start raising funds for it, and they have some really spectacular successes at raising funds. There's an event in February, it's not Valentine's Day, but maybe the day before in like 1969, there was $1 million on one day. And so people understand the need for this hospital. By the time it gets built, it's probably a $9 million project. It starts being planned in the 1960s, but doesn't open until 1975. And again, it's a story of expanding into the 20th century and offering more and more and more. So many people in Chippewa and the surrounding areas, this is their hospital. This is the hospital that they were born in, that they've had all their care in, that not only is it a business to them, but it's part of their life story.
A lot of people in the Catholic community really connected with Father Climi. People went to Mass at Sacred Heart on Sundays with him. He sort of had his own community, even though they belonged to other parishes. They were really connected to Father Climi.
I went to St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church in Independence. That's where our church was when I grew up. I had my catechism classes down there. I was confirmed down there. That was my church. And Father Climi, when I started at the hospital, I was really surprised when he was there.
Father Climi was a chaplain at Sacred Heart Hospital for many, many years, and he was beloved, as far as I have heard, that everybody who was ever met Father Climi, the care that he gave to those in the hospital and the loved ones who came to visit those in the hospital was pretty exceptional.
He was amazing with families, amazing with us as employees. We felt very comfortable going to him if we had a complaint, and it was almost like you felt more comfortable going to him if you had a problem than if you went to administration, because at that point, years ago, he would have things changed for you. I would also remember, too, because like he was the priest down in my church, when family would come from the Independence, Arcadia area, he was always in there talking to them. And also, too, when you saw people in the community that needed gas money to go back home, all of a sudden out of his pocket, his wallet would come and he would give them money to go home. Or if you saw somebody that needed some money for a bill, all of a sudden, after they were discharged from the ER, he'd say, "Come with me," and you could tell that he was going to give them money. He was a special kind of person. After he passed, I would go down the steps and his pictures on the Father Climi room down there, and you just look at him and think, where are you now? You know, he was just that bond for everybody, no matter what the distance was. Very personal person, you know, he was.
I was friends with Father Climi, and I bet there's an awful lot of people in Eau Claire who can say that. When, you know,
Oh, yeah.
I worked inpatient psychiatric, so I would be going down to the ER to get a patient who was really having trouble. But Father was always calm, and I said, how can you be so calm during all these crises? And He said, well, it's my neighbor. I live right next door to God. He was right next to the chapel.
His apartment was right next to the chapel.
My influence of my neighbor here.
He began working in Eau Claire at Sacred Heart Hospital in June of 1968. And in June of 2013, he celebrated 60 years of ordination. There was a big party for him at the hospital. Sadly, he died a couple months later in August of 2013. But he served as the chaplain at Sacred Heart Hospital for 45 years and just really had a big influence on the way patient care was handled as far as from the chaplain's point of view.
With Sacred Heart Hospital, when it began, the intent was that it would be not denominational. It would serve all religions. It would serve all ethnicities. So it was built on next to a German Catholic church in an immigrant neighborhood back in 1889. But from the beginning, the sisters, it's even stated in the newspapers right away, saying, you will serve everybody.
One of the things that I think is important to understand about the hospital sisters is that there are a lot of women with a lot of influence and a lot of power. That's one thing that we don't think of typically as an early 20th century thing. We think of all the old gray men, right, who are leading everything and who are the chairman of the board and all this stuff. But there are a lot of women who are acting proactively in this endeavor.
The history, I mean, it's so much of Eau Claire's history is based on the hospital sisters and, you know, what the work that the sisters did to get that hospital going. I'd love people to know that history and just what some really determined women can do.
The history of a hospital in a community is something that people rely on. Care providers and trusted confidants, you know, the chaplains, the nurses, the people in the cafeteria. Each person is there, and you know, at your worst and maybe your best times, you know, when you have a baby, when you get the cancer diagnosis. And so a hospital is more than a building. It's a place that is a community, and it's the people who work there, it's the patients. And so when you lose that, the impact is more than economic. It's more than health. It's a hole in the ecosystem of our community in the Chippewa Valley, and a hole in people's hearts, you know, to know that that is no longer there.
I just wanted to express that the people that have worked there are very special people. It's not just a business to the employees, it's been a family. It's been a place that you could go where you felt comfortable. It's a place where when people could make lots of money traveling all over the place, I didn't even question whether I wanted to leave there. It was part of my life. So if anything, you know, I wanted to express what it was like to work there, and it really was a big family.
And so when we think about a place that's closing like this, how sad it is, how disruptive it is, the thing that's always happened, to whether it's Chippewa or Eau Claire, is that people come together, and there are other avenues that come and lead us forward. And I think, yeah, this is going to be disruptive, but it's amazing that they've been here for 140 years, and our next chapter is going to be different. We don't know what it is, but the people at Chippewa Falls, they find a way to make it through. They've always done that.
And somehow I think you think it's never going to end, but it did here. And so I think that's the challenge for the community, and to remember, okay, how are we going to pick that up and keep it going, to not let those people down.
From a historian's point of view, we run across these stories quite a bit, and so things come and go, and it is a very sad time in our community, but I like to try to remind people that things, you know, just like they did after Uniroyal, things diversified, Eau Claire became stronger, and history tells us that Eau Claire will survive this as well.